take an investment opinion from me today, I would say build a university. It is one of those few sectors in India where your consumer pays upfront, investing a ticket size of one of the biggest purchases they would ever make in their lifetime, and in return expect zero liability. As good as setting up a healthcare center that does not deal with tangible, measurable damage. Let me elaborate. When you admit yourself in a healthcare center, you make an upfront payment and sign a liability waiver. Without that, you just can't get in. It's a liability waiver, a legally admissible document at the government's judiciary. Admitting yourself at a higher ed institution, very similar. You cannot get in without paying their fee, and the liability waiver is just an unsigned existence. So one must pay their fee, come to the classroom, and hope for a successful education at their institution. If the institution doesn't train well, then you have to leave silently, similar to the rare exit of hospitals, and there is no liability waiver you sign to take to the government. One key difference we must not miss is that between these two industries, a consumer goes to a hospital when in critical need, giving a hospital no choice and enough reason to waive off their liability because they did not select their consumer. But higher education is a consumer's and university's mutual choice, expressed by an application and subsequent selection, endorsement from the government as a recognized qualification. The unsigned liability waiver in higher ed, in a country like India, where over 2/3 of university enrollments are first-generation college students, a country where only 1 of 10 people have ever gone to a higher education institutions, puts at stake a young individual's dreams, a guardian's lifelong savings, and at most times, a society's trust on education. I am a higher ed growth strategist who was introduced to the business of higher education 10 years back. Since then, the sector has intrigued me, the business model has fascinated me, and as luck would have it, higher ed institutions have offered me work in different capacities. I often ponder, why is the government, our institutions, our industry so unconcerned, so unaccountable towards unemployment of the educated? What if universities had to offer services like Amazon and the government had to set up a refund policy? When a graduate doesn't meet industry expectations, they would be eligible for refunds. What if a university graduate, as an educated young citizen, had twice the weightage for their vote? What if the industry had to compulsorily recruit a minimum number of fresh graduates from institutions in their geography? Would universities, our industry, and our government still be so unconcerned, still behave so unaccountable towards graduate unemployment? What has been happening with the higher ed sector of India probably seems to be very similar to what happened at my home last Sunday. I was out buying groceries. Our house help, who cooks for us, and I don't find enough time to discuss the grocery needs. So hence my wife is the one who moderates this purchase list. Now last Sunday, she stepped out with a few of her friends, and I started my usual Sunday with a clear intent to tick off all tasks on my task list as soon as possible. So without checking what was in the refrigerator, what was cooked that morning, I went shopping and came back with 2 kilograms of cauliflower. That wasn't a problem. That wasn't even worrying. But what our help did is, the 3.5 kilograms of cauliflower now in our home was consumed in various ways. Gobi parathas that were already prepared for breakfast, last evening's aloo gobi leftovers for lunch, cauliflower soup in Monday's dinner, gobi keema for Wednesday lunch, and because we were all so fed up with cauliflower, the remaining more than a kilogram finally landed in the garbage bin on Thursday. I feel this household activity and the higher education sector have so much in similar. The government, industry, and institutions have been busy, not finding an opportunity to talk to each other, putting our students at stake, without realizing the graduate unemployment crisis the country goes through. The institutions have been purely talking about their business goals, the industry just unconcerned even when they have no appetite to absorb graduates, and the government failing to moderate the conversation between the demand and supply agents. Pick up a relevant editorial and you will find all these stakeholders talking about this topic on educated unemployment. Was the Indian higher education sector always so unconcerned? No, there is no evidence of that kind. In fact, India's most successful, globally acknowledged institutions are an evidence of a robust alignment between government, industry, and academia. IITs, for instance, India's premier technology institutes, were conceptualized in the pre-independence era by Sir Dalal, who foresaw that technology will be the backbone of India's prosperity in the years to come. IIMs, the prestigious B schools, were proposed by the Planning Commission in 1950s to train professionals who could manage public sector enterprises being established under India's industrial policy. The NID was built on the recommendations of the IIMs report of 1956 that that advocated setting up of an indigenous design legacy balancing traditions and modernity for a modern India. It is just impossible to miss the supply and demand relationship in these three success stories. Impossible to miss the decisiveness of the government, the social accountability our institutions used to take up, and the opportunity that the industry would always offer. Impossible to miss the common goal all these three stakeholders had for society. The academia was creating fit graduates for the industry, and the industry had enough appetite to absorb. One who was educated had enough opportunity to be employed because the opportunity was envisioned before the institution was. Compare the first 2 decades after independence with the most recent 2, and you will realize that the number of higher ed institutions in India have multiplied, but so has the educated unemployment. Look at the next 2, and you will find that our national education policy is targeting to double the higher ed enrollment. This is the basic misalignment behind our nation's modern graduate unemployment dilemma, causing us to stand at a junction where 50% of Indian graduates are seen as unemployable against the roles they seek. When we continuously emphasize on the quality of education provided by IITs, IIMs, and NIDs, we miss appreciating the vision behind the establishment of these schools, the supply and demand relationship, and the presence of a fine mix that was moderated very intentionally. A mix that John Maynard Keynes, father of modern macroeconomics, talked about in 1936 in his endeavor to show that capitalist economies with their decentralized market system do not automatically generate full employment, and that governments, institutions, and industries need to pitch in, deliberately pursuing stabilization policies. Learning from last Sunday, my wife and I, when we go back home today, plan to meet our help. Once we reach, we can discuss our grocery requirement, together figure out the possible end dish, together aiming to consume from stem to root. Collaborate to bridge the gap between what we want and what's available in stock. Collaboratively bring back the end outcome in the process, balance supply and demand, assume accountability and responsibility in this weekly household chore. The idea of a successful collaboration induced by a simple conversation intended to achieve a finely moderated mix between the three of us is what I call a trilogue. A trilogue between government, institutions, and industry. A trilogue to co-create an equilibrium between what institutions produce and industry absorbs. A trilogue to co-create an ecosystem where the three key decision makers, the key stakeholders, are accountable. A trilogue to co-create responsibility and stake in the employment of our young graduates. A trilogue to co-create safety net for our society to battle both food insecurity and employment. Circling back to where I started this conversation, a trilogue to co-create education and employment. Thank you.